Hello, welcome to Child Development 195 on Chapter 3, Communicating to Support Teacher Awareness. Communication to increase a teacher's awareness of practices and interactions is the focus of this chapter. Increasing effective listening, reflective feedback, and exploring ways to resolve conflict and increase cultural competence is central to the development of the mentoring process. A mentor's effective communication skills include joining with a teacher to nurture a growing capacity for responsiveness, curiosity, persistence, and questioning of their own perspective. The mentoring process has the potential to affirm a teacher with promising dispositions that she or he has the potential to be a professional with a repertoire of effective practices. In this chapter, we're going to learn about a cyclical process of observing, reflecting, and applying, which is used actually throughout the field in a couple of different ways, which we will talk about later on in a few slides. But communication is the focus of this chapter, and we're going to talk about a wide variety of ways in order to communicate effectively with our teachers. Mentoring through dialogue. In order for us to be able to work with a teacher, we must be able to communicate effectively. And I'm assuming that all of us have worked with somebody who has not necessarily communicated effectively. So hopefully you are not going to be one of those, that you're going to be able to communicate effectively. And you're going to do this by employing active listening, extremely important. We'll talk about it here coming up in a few slides. Use reflective feedback. Conflict resolution, because not everything comes out perfect. And then also we're going to discuss cultural competence. A lack of communication can impede our ability to supervise and mentor other teachers in the field. So we don't want, there's a balance. Too much communication, not enough communication. I'm sure we've probably worked with some people who over-communicate in the sense that they're always talking and we're not able to necessarily get a word in edgewise. We don't want to be that person. On the other hand, we don't want to have a minimal amount of communication where we're not really giving that support to the teacher. Sorry, my chair squeaking in this video. Okay, so we're going to continue on here. Mentoring through dialogue, we're also going to discuss the use of open-ended questions. Listen to the teacher's apprehensions, feelings, and emotions. And again, we're gonna touch upon these in more detail coming up here in a few minutes. Mentors who resist giving initial evaluation. So we're talking about those, if you say, oh, how great you're doing, or how you need to improve upon this or this or this. What we want to do as mentors is basically we want to resist that initial evaluation for a while, okay? Instead, we want to provide descriptive feedback or stimulate a teacher's thinking with open-ended questions, the who, the what, the why, the when, those kinds of questions, in order to enable teachers to problem solve and improve their own practices. So if we come in right away with that evaluation, we're not going to give them the opportunity to problem solve on their own. So we want to make sure that we are not prohibiting them from thinking on their own and from problem solving on their own. We want to make sure that we're listening before being heard, and this is a really good one. Several years ago, there was somebody who I realized it was really just a hard time getting a word in edgewise, or if if there's something really and it would kind of make me frustrated when I had communication with this person. So what I learned over the course of time was just to listen. And I just patiently now listen to this person. And if I have something to say, I will say it. It depends on how important it is to say. Of course, if it's something really urgent or important, I'm going to probably say it, try to get, stop the conversation so I'm able to get heard as well. But listening before being heard is really important. If we're a mentor and all we want to do is, we'll do this, make sure you do this, don't forget to do this, you got to do this, and not give the teacher the opportunity to discuss and to share their emotions, their feelings, their apprehensions, those kinds of things, then we're not necessarily going to be able to give them the correct guidance or guidance in a way that they would actually change their mind and improve their teaching. So that example that I gave before of listening before being heard, that's something I actually employ on a regular basis, especially with someone that I communicate with on a fairly regular basis. Listen for understanding. So again, goes back to that listen before being heard. Are we understanding what they're trying to say? I know many times, sometimes with students and everything, and if I'm trying to get to the root of the, maybe the issue or the concern, I really need to hear that student out before and listen if I'm understanding them correctly, and sometimes giving that that mirror talk back as to, this is what I heard you say, to make sure that I am understanding correctly. And then understanding the teacher perspective. So we've all been there. We've all been a first-year teacher, a second-year teacher. We've all been new to the field, and it can be definitely nerve-wracking, and it can also be a little scary. How do we deal with a parent? How do we deal with parent situations and so forth? I've talked to some students over the course of time, and one student that I was meeting in my office, I'm just terrified to talk to my parents, like the parents in my classroom. She felt very intimidated by them. So by listening to that, and okay, now I see, now I hear what you're saying, and then now I know that in class we can talk about certain things that might definitely help her improve in those areas. So understanding the teacher's perspective. So we've all been there. We've all been, new to a field, new to something, so we can understand that. Understand where they're coming from. Communication basics. Think of a time when someone has changed your mind on how to do something. So something maybe in a new way, the classroom. So think about that. So has there been a point in time where where somebody's changed your mind on how to do something? This could be anything from, new guidelines coming down from the state, or from if you're working in Head Start, from the large agency, the federal program, or if you're working for a private program, it could be, or a faith-based program, it could be something coming down from the church administration. It could be something coming from your board of directors, for a wide variety of things. Or it could just be the way in which, I know, for instance, language, and the way in which we teach language over the course of time has changed. So anyway, so think of a time when someone has changed your mind on how to do something in a new way in the classroom. How did they get you to do it? Okay, and I'm going to pause on these for a couple minutes, or not a couple minutes, but for you to think about that. So how did they get you to do it? Was there any dialogue in the process? Were you directed to do it, kind of that, or else? Or was it a choice? How did you feel in the short term and the long term? So I can give you an example of something that came up several years ago, but it is still something that's kind of new. It was a new way of thinking, a new way that we had to change something in the classroom. So, for instance, so several years ago, it came up when I brought up the topic of community care licensing in one of my classes. And we were discussing this, we were discussing that, and we were discussing the whole personal rights thing. So years and years, when I first started teaching and I first started working with young children, 20 plus years ago, personal rights was part of it, but it wasn't to the place of where it is today, in the sense of, the personal rights of making sure the personal rights of a child are not being violated. Of course, I'm not talking about like ever hurting or harming a child, but just even with a whole wide variety of, things that come into play. So the example I'm going to give you is one that a student shared with me in class. One day she said, well, it's against a child's personal rights to wake them up from nap. And I'm like, what? She goes, oh yeah, our center got cited on it. because we were, gently waking the children up from nap. And I'm like, what? I've never heard of that. So, being the person that I am, of course I was very much like, against it and like, what? Like, I've never heard this, tell me more. I wanted to hear more. After class that day, I looked it up. And the thing about community care licensing in the state of California is that, they talk about personal rights, but they don't give you specifics. So there's nothing in licensing that says waking a child up from nap time is violating their personal rights. And I'm talking about the child who's already slept for a couple of hours, that you're getting on with your day. So, we go down for nap time, they fall asleep. And then, just like your child or children in the morning, which I'm sure you've experienced at some points in time. I know my son for years, time to get up, Jonathan, let's go, come on. Gently, giving him a tap on the back, come on, it's time to get up, a gentle nudge, that kind of thing. Talking to him and so forth, because it was time to get up in the morning. So, parents do this on a regular basis. But at nap time, apparently, there's a personal right about waking a child up from nap. But that was never shared with us directly or anything like that. So I went into my, my curiosity got me, and I'm like, okay, what do we have to do? Where, what do we have to find out? And then, of course, when I share this information with the teachers, they're like, what? No, what? How can that be? So they definitely had, they were pushing back for me. So, immediately I need to talk to our licensing analyst. I need to find out, is this, where exactly does this stand? I'm not too sure. I've never heard of this before. So it was confirmed. Okay, so then what do we do about it? So over the course of time, we had parents who were literally, in my office, saying, this is ridiculous. My child's not getting up till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They went to bed, they went to sleep at 2, or not 2, sorry. They went to sleep at 12:30, 12:30, 1 o'clock, something like that, and they're sleeping till 4. They're not going to bed at night. They're very upset about that. So I'm like, okay, well, there has to be some kind of solution to this. So I go back to licensing and our licensing analyst and say, okay, what can we do? How can we solve this? She shared with me that it was okay for parents to sign off that said, yes, it's okay for you to wake my child after an appropriate time of a nap, if they fall asleep, 10 minutes before it's time to get up, that's not necessarily an appropriate, nap time, time for a nap, should I say. But, the child who slept for a significant period of time during that, generally that 2-hour window of nap time, we can gently go over and nudge them and wake them up. Now, some parents, do not want to sign off on that. And they said, no, it's okay, just let them sleep. Well, in the classroom, you can get up, you can move around, children can, start making noise, you turn on the lights, and sometimes you're still going to have that child that's just out cold, sleeping sound as sound can be. So, it's one of those things that if they don't sign off on it, we cannot wake them up because that's a personal rights issue. But yet, on the other hand, we can get them to sign off on that. And when I shared that in one of my other classes, some of my students were like, what? Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I'm going to share that with my director. So, hopefully the word gets out. But that's one of those things that I can think about, directly as to something that had to, change in a new way. And that was one of those things kind of like, you have to do it or else you could get cited, and we don't want to get cited for something like that. So we were pretty much directed to do it. But I can tell you that within that process of working with the other teachers and so forth, we had a lot of dialogue. And then we try to figure out how can we solve the problem, because we do have this problem, and parents are not happy with us for not being able to wake up their children. So if you want to pause this now, pause the slide for a couple of minutes to kind of think about a time. You might want to write something down with that. That's your choice. I'm going to continue on now, but if you want to pause it, feel free. Oh, sorry, forgot that last one. What would you have done differently? So in the case and situation with the waking up from nap, the personal rights situation, there's nothing I really could have done differently. like I said, except we were able to solve the problem and at least get parents that were upset about us allowing their children to sleep for an extended period of time, that we were able to give them a solution to that problem. All right, communication basics. Communication involves a complex interplay between people who are both expressing and receiving messages. So if we're the ones talking, we're expressing it. If we're the ones listening, of course, we're receiving that. For the mentor process, you must be able to establish trust and figure out how to work well together. And establishing trust just doesn't happen overnight. It's something that's going to take an extended period, an extended period of time with that. For instance, if you're mentoring somebody at your site, they might already have trust built up with you, so it becomes easier to start that process. But if it's somebody who's brand new, it might be a student teacher who's coming in and you're mentoring that student teacher, establishing that trust is going to take, might take a couple weeks or so, 3-4 weeks, to really kind of build that trust and go, okay, I can trust you as a mentor here. How does the teacher learn best? We're going to talk about that in future chapters, so we're not going to hit it too much here tonight, or today, should I say. But how does the teacher learn best? We want to make sure that we look at adult learning styles, and we'll talk about that later, like I said. And then strength is based on a no-fault process, so we all make mistakes. As you know, throughout this video, I'm going to make several mistakes. I'm probably going to click something wrong or say something wrong or do something wrong or flub-dub something. So, and I know that you're not like, going to be, necessarily going to the dean and telling him that, oh, Diane was not perfect on her PowerPoint slides here. So we want to make sure that as a teacher, coming into the field and everything, or a teacher who's new to the field, that yeah, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to kind of screw up, but hopefully you're going to learn from that. And that's the whole thing too. Is really important to, when you're mentoring somebody, to let them know, there are some things, of course, that are really serious. You hurt or harm a child, yeah, that's there's no there's fault in that. There's fault in that. But if you're talking about, ooh, I did a product art project versus a process art project, the children are not going to be hurt or harmed by that in the long run. We do want to do more process-ended art, open-ended process-based art projects with children. So it's not the end product that we're looking at, but that process. So in fact, today I can think of a student who was emailing me about approval for an art project for the student teaching class, and we were going back and forth, and I stated, oh, tell me how this is open-ended. I didn't want them to think that, oh man, my activity, it really is horrible, it sucks, I'm not good at this. No, how can we improve that? What can we do to change that? So if they can see that you're there to really help and support them, and not to judge them, and not to fail them, that kind of thing, that definitely builds strength in the process and in the relationship. Listening with attention and acknowledgement first. So we want to definitely listen and respond. And when we're listening and responding, we are hopefully don't have a false front. We use our undivided attention. We probe for understanding. And we listen with empathy. See, like just right now, I clicked that. Clicked that one and I shouldn't have clicked. I clicked a little too soon. With this listening and responding, I want to give an example of a time when it was actually, it was my very first official lead teacher job. So I started in a classroom, and it was in a Head Start classroom up in Northern California. And it was my, even though I had been working in the field for, 5-6 years in different programs and so forth, this was, I was the first time I was the lead teacher in the classroom. Oh, how exciting. I finished up with my bachelor's degree, and I was all ready to hit the road running. Well, when it came to this listening and responding, my supervisor, I definitely did not see her as a mentor. Okay. And when I was thinking about this chapter and this section of the chapter, it definitely made me think of her. Her name was Kate, and she definitely had a false front. So it was one of those things, like, you could never read her. Like, I didn't know if she was happy, if she was sad, if she was mad, if I was doing a horrible job, if I was doing a great job. She was like the most unexpressive person whatsoever. Um, I couldn't read her, and that was so difficult. So, um, you know, if I had questions, she would respond, but the way in which she would respond, I could never see, okay, is she understanding what I'm saying or not? I mean, over the course of time, my reviews were positive and everything. I'm like, okay, well, I guess she's happy about it. But it was very difficult for me to read her. So as a teacher, and she was my mentor, I felt like I really wasn't being listened to, and I definitely was not getting any response. So that made it a very difficult situation for my first year out. But as it comes out, in the long run, it also makes it a learning experience. You can think about it in that way too after a while. So listening and responding. Effective listening is the other part of this, where we want to make sure that we are paying attention. So we're not going to be like Kate. We want to pay attention. We want to acknowledge. So, yes, okay. I mean, we show that in our eyes. We show that with nods. We show that in our nonverbal language. Same thing with the paying attention. Eye contact, things along those lines definitely help us, help them to see that we are paying attention. Paraphrasing. So, this is how I understand it, or, summarizing what their thoughts are. That goes into our summarizing. Sorry. See, I don't know how to go back on this one. Let me see if I can do that. Ooh, I did. Sorry. I'm on another computer here for this lecture, and I'm seeing if this is going to work. So anyway, sorry, bear with me on this one. With this effective listening, so we want to make sure that, are we really listening? There's a difference between hearing what somebody's saying, so I can hear words are coming out of your mouth, but the listening part of it is that whole processing part where I'm getting that in my brain and going, okay, this is what this person is saying, and I'm processing it in my head, and I'm going, okay, now I understand where you're coming from. So we want to make sure that we are using, that we're using effective listening, and that they're reading us in a way that they know, where we're coming from. All right, there's the listening and responding chart. So there's several charts and graphs in this chapter. So I'm not going to read through them all, of course. But the listening and responding chart, you want to, check for understanding. I do that quite a bit, especially when I'm in face-to-face classes and so forth. Not so much here, because I'm like saying, do you understand? You get it? Are you on the right track? Am I on the right track? Am I, those kinds of things I might say, but it's really hard because I can't see your response here. So, but I do that a lot when I'm talking to somebody face to face. And then the other one that I wanted to talk about was that elaborating. Tell me more about it. Give me, let me. What are you thinking about that? So those are a couple areas on that listening and responding chart that I just wanted to touch base with you guys on. The other one is the noticing and supporting chart. So I know you can do it, being supportive in that way, demonstrating. This is how you do something. I do that a lot in my classes, where, here, I'll show you an activity, how to do it. One of the ones is like how to read a book to children and get them to listen. But it's one of those things when we're noticing, supporting, we also want them to know that, that we're here for them, and it's okay to take a risk. It's okay to get out there. There's times in which a student will come up to me with an activity idea, and I'm like, I don't know, that could work. It might not work. I'm not too sure, but try it. Go ahead and try it. Let's see how it works. So that's also, noticing, supporting in what they're doing, and giving them that, that little bit of a oomph and a push to say, oh, okay, well, let's try it. Seeking out information. So we want to make sure that, again, that they're able to give us the information that we need. We might be asking some of those questions, and that gets into our next one of the open-ended questions. And that's really what I like to use when I'm seeking out information, are some open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are framed to generate conversation without right or wrong answers. There's many times when I'll be at home and I'll just ask a question, to my husband or something. And he'll be like, I don't know. And I'm like, I wasn't really looking for an answer. I was just kind of putting it out there like, like it wasn't a right or wrong answer. It was just a question. We should be using all these all the time, of course, with the children. So you should have an idea as to how to use them with adults as well. We're talking about who, what, why, when, where, how. Okay. Those are really the focus. Those 6 words are really the focus of open-ended questions. How you start an open-ended question is with one of those 6 words. Now, with your book, we don't want to use closed-ended questions. And the book actually, in your chapter, in that section of open-ended questions and giving you open-ended questions, one of the questions is the book uses can. So it says, can you tell me more about da 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 da, right? Can you tell me more about your art activity? No. Oh, okay. So, so I'm, if I use that word can, there's always an opportunity for somebody to say no. The same thing with the did, the do, the, would, could, are you ready for your activity? It's a yes or no. There's either, there's 1 or 2 answers. It's either yes or no. Which you could kind of go back to that whole right and wrong answers. But you could say something like, tell me when you're ready. Does that make sense? So that would make it an open-ended question. Or when will you be ready for your activity? So there's a specific time that you're looking for something there, but that time is up to that person. Hopefully that all makes sense. But anyway, we want to use more open-ended questions. The textbook gives you quite a few that work really well, except for that can. You don't want to use can because that is not an open-ended question. So just a little error there in your textbook. Give and receive feedback. So a mentor gives feedback to foster new practices or try old ideas in new ways. There's a delicate time there, okay? So you have to kind of know when's the right time to give some of that feedback. And we want to, of course, try to give it in a positive way. There has to be that respect built up first, so that trust and respect. Verbal feedback begins with comments that are specific, hopefully, descriptive, strength-based, and strength-based. So when we are giving verbal feedback, again, it's one of those things you don't want to do right away. Remember, we talked about that at the very beginning of this lecture. We don't want to do that right away. We don't want to come out and say, oh, you should do this and this and this and this. But when we do give that feedback, so for instance, let's take the, we're kind of like on the art thing today. I don't know, that's in my head, I guess. But a teacher who brings in a product, based art. Let's just give the, here's one. A paper plate and making a face out of it, right? You've got like circles, you've got like crescents, for smiley faces and so forth. Different, ears and so forth. But it pretty much makes a face out of a paper plate. So if I'm, giving feedback on that, or the teacher brings that idea to me, I might ask them, maybe a question, I might even just start off with something as simple as, where did you get the idea? Where did you get this activity idea? Oh, I got it from a friend who's been in the field for like 25 years. Okay, so, and I might ask the next question, have you taken any, and that's a closed-ended question, but have you taken any art classes? And hopefully they're going to say, oh yeah, I took the Cello 125, I took the art class. Okay, so can you tell me something about, there we go again, tell me something about your art class. What's process versus product? Do you remember those terms? Can you tell me something about those? And how do you see that in this activity? So we can ask those questions and everything, and we'll give that verbal feedback. And we might. It depends on your classroom. You might let them try that activity. You might not let them try that activity. I personally probably would not let them try that activity, just because I really don't want the children to do something like that. But if I did, I would probably come back with, how did it go? How did the children respond? What were you expecting from the activity? So, and after some of those things, then it might be, well, my guess is probably it didn't have a lot of children come over to your activity. A lot of children didn't participate in it, or they got bored with it, probably because it was a closed-ended activity. So what do you think you could do next time to make something more open-ended, or how could you make this more open-ended activity? Okay. When we also give and receive feedback, we use reflective comments that are hopefully open and non-judgmental. So again, and I like to let the teachers know, of course, I'm going to make mistakes too. So it's not just you, it's me. We're all in this process together. Being non-judgmental with that. We want to help to see from that another's perspective. So, and we've all been in those shoes of being that first year teacher. I'll never forget the time when it was before I was actually the lead teacher in the classroom. I was still, in my bachelor's program and so forth. But I had a part-time job somewhere, and the teacher comes over to me, and I'm sitting at the table. She had me over at the art area, and a little girl asked me to draw a tree or a rainbow or something like that. So I just start drawing it for her, and I hadn't taken the art class yet. I didn't know, I was still learning this whole process, and the teacher comes over to me and just very politely and gently, she comes over to me and she just says, "Diane, I just want to, can I just talk to you for a second?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So she's like, "I just want to let you know that when we're sitting at the art table, it's best if we don't draw for the children." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I didn't know that." And she said, and then she explained why. She said, "Yeah, because if they see that you're drawing a tree or a rainbow in this way, then that's the way that they think that they can only be made." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I see where you're coming from." And then I, really thought back to my elementary years when teachers, up on the board said, "This is how you draw a tree," and and then I was like, "Oh," and then as I got older, I was like, "Oh, but I could draw a tree this way, or this way, or this way." I didn't have to draw it just the way that they showed me. So seeing that, so she was totally non-judgmental. She gave me good feedback, and luckily I was open to it, and I will still remember I still remember that conversation to this day, and how she made me feel, and she made me feel really good, even though she was basically saying, "Hey, Diane, don't do this again," but it made me feel really good. So it was a very positive experience, and I hope that I can be that way when I'm working with other teachers. What have you tried before? So we might ask a question along those lines. If this happens again, what do you think you will do or say? And those two, I really like those two questions, because, if you've tried something different before, how did it work? Was it a positive experience? Was it something that maybe you could change? And then again, if it happens again, hopefully we're all learning from those things of, so when the next time when I sat down at a table with a child at that program or another program, they said, "Teacher, will you draw me a rainbow?" Well, show me how you draw your rainbow. And we could talk about colors, so I could be talking to them about, well, I know there's a lot of different colors in the rainbow, and maybe I even talk about the colors of the rainbow. The red, orange, yellow, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Sorry, hadn't thought of that for quite a while. But anyway, so maybe I talk about those colors, and maybe we look at different colors in the box of crayons and so forth, or markers, or whatever it might be. So I have something else that I'm a way in which I can work with a child and to get them to draw the rainbow instead of me drawing the rainbow. So if it happens again, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? I've learned that over the years, because, of course, children have asked me to draw things for them. And at the lab school, there'll be many times where I'll see maybe one of our newer assistants over there, and they're drawing at the table with the children. In fact, it happened not too long ago with somebody with a child in the gross motor room. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. So, after the children left and everybody left, then I was able to talk to the person about the appropriateness and, exactly, how do the children, how are they able to gain some creativity in this process? So that type of thing. Instructive feedback. We want to use this to be, we're using it, but we're kind of saving it, in other words. So we're not using it each and every time that we just feel, we're using this for the really important things. Let's put it that way. It is time dependent, so you want to give that probably as soon after you see somebody doing something or saying something or acting in a way in which we want to give them some feedback. We add a few ideas after positive feedback, so we always want to give that positive feedback. Well, I saw, over at the art table today, you were sitting down with the children and you were really asking a lot of open-ended questions to them as they were drawing. So I might say something like that. But the one thing that I did notice too was that I saw that, when Susie asked you to draw a rainbow for her, that you started to draw one. So maybe we could talk about that for a little bit. Okay. Refrain from starting feedback too soon in the process. So again, we have to get to know our mentors. Sorry, there goes my chair. This is the creaking, cracking chair. In case if you can hear that on your end. But we want to refrain from giving that feedback too soon. So first week or two, 3 weeks, that kind of thing. It depends on the person and so forth. We're gonna get to their dispositions here in a few minutes, but that's part of it too, is the disposition. Of not wanting to give it too soon, because if we give it too soon, they might shut down on us. Because that brings up some of those feelings of judgment, confusion, and defensiveness. And I'm sure we've all experienced people who get defensive because you're telling them something that maybe they don't want to hear, or they're feeling that they're being judged. This happens all the time, so it's important to give that positive feedback, but also you have to get to know the person. That trust comes in, that respect comes in again, because otherwise some people can just put up that wall and they don't want to hear another word from you. It definitely brings about more stress in the teacher if we're giving a lot of instructive feedback. So again, we kind of want that no fault and give that feedback, but not necessarily always instructive. And we want to conclude with affirmations to keep the relationship strong. Hey, all those other things that you kind of put it together in that sandwich where you say something positive and then you say something that maybe needs a little bit of direction. And then at the end, we want to conclude again with that, hey, it was great having you in here. Your smile is contagious in the classroom, something along those lines, to still try to build that relationship. This is one of your tables that's there here in your textbook, but we've got that informing and, encourage thoughtful review of practices by doing some of these things here. And the one thing that I want to hit on can be the use nonverbal modeling of effective listening skills by sitting in close proximity to the children or the teacher or whatever it might be. And I'll never forget this one teacher, and she was definitely a mentor, and she had worked at the lab school for well over 25 years. And she actually, it was after she had retired, and she came back to substitute one day for us. And I'll never forget, I was in the classroom and I was watching her, and there were two children. One child was coming down the stairs of the loft, and the other child was coming up. And we're talking about just like a ladder stairs. We're not talking about, full-on stairs with, railings and everything else. We're talking about basically a ladder, okay, attached to the loft. And she literally just stood there and watched. And I think the only words she said were, "How are you going to do this? how are you going to work this out? Something along those lines. And she just stood there and listened and watched the children. And it was just great and amazing to see how the children could really solve their own problem and figure it out on their own, without the mentor, without the teacher, at this point in time, without the teacher really even saying anything. So modeling those behaviors, since then, I was like, ooh, that's a really great technique. I'm going to use that too. Because I was, still rather new into the field and so forth when I saw her doing that, and I was like, wow, that's a really good thing. And she just patiently sat there. She watched. She said just literally just a couple words, and then but that gave me a really great model to go, wow, you can do it that way too. And she wasn't even telling me what to do. I was just picking up on that because I want to learn. Okay, and so many times that can happen with that, with a teacher in the process. So if you're mentoring somebody, they're hopefully watching you all the time. The cycle of mentoring, there's communication strategies. So we want to be able to listen and give feedback in the communication process, and this is not easy. So this is not an easy task. In fact, there is an art, I like this quote from your book, there is an art to communication that is intuitive and hard to teach. It's honed over a lifetime of observing others and noticing nonverbal cues. I'm going to pause right there for a second. Do you ever just go to, like, say, the mall or, I don't know, Target or wherever you might be? But I know the mall's a good place for this because especially the malls around here, they have those areas where you can just sit. And, I've had to wait for somebody at some point in time, and I've just been sitting there, and I just love to watch people. Because you really observe others, you're noticing those nonverbal cues, exactly how are they coming across. So, you have to see others and observe others in order to gain this really great art of communication. Yet professionals who act as mentors can become more intentional and effective by completing a cycle of communication strategies. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. This observe, reflect, apply. So as I stated before, it's one of those things that in curriculum and so forth, we talk about plan, implement, and evaluate. Same kind of thing, okay? You want to plan the activity, you want to implement the activity, and then you want to evaluate it and see, are you going to do that activity again? Are you going to change it in a different way? So it's that cyclical process, the same thing here. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, this reminds me of pie. And I actually like pie because it's round like a pie, when you eat, I don't know, chocolate cream pie or something like that. I'm personally not a pie lover, but anyway, but if you eat pie, it was plan, implement, and evaluate, PIE. And it makes you really easy to remember that plan, implement, and evaluate. So reflect, we want to use those use positive feedback, facilitate reflection and connections for interpretation. Applying, giving the instruction feedback, ongoing affirmation, and encourage to reflect, and then observing, listen, respond with empathy, notice, support, and seek information. And the thing about this is that really the observation is really your first part of that, where I kind of would like really put the observe where the reflect is, and the reflect, I kind of move it all around one. So having the observe basically start at 1 o'clock, you know what I mean? That 1 to 4 o'clock kind of a thing. So I would have that information there in that square, because when we observing, hopefully we're paying attention, we're acknowledging, we're paraphrasing, we're summarizing, we're doing those kinds of things. And that's usually some of that first process, right? When we reflect, can you tell me more about that? What have you tried before? That evidence for it. And then when we go to the application or the apply, we want to make sure that we are, affirming and motivating teachers to keep it going. I like the way that you did this, or, tell me more about the way in which you saw it, or how did you see that come out or work out, and so forth. So again, it's that cyclical process, but like I said, I'm kind of the one that I think I would move that observe to where reflect is and so forth. And you might have totally different opinions about that. Types of feedback. So as a mentor, you're going to be providing the teacher with various forms of and types of feedback. And these can come in a wide variety of resources now. We didn't always have all this. Face-to-face, we've always had, okay? Give that face-to-face feedback. So, sometimes, though, there's not a lot of time in which to talk in the classroom. So sometimes face-to-face becomes difficult, especially in the sense of having that time to talk. So that's something that can come into play. Email, for most people, is a great way to give feedback. You know, with some people, they might want to text versus an email, but texting, I think, is more limiting than email, and probably is not going to be used as regularly. So email, phone calls. You know, there's a point in time where sometimes I'm just like, oh, I just need to pick up the phone and call this person. Because email just won't do it justice. You know, it depends on what it is. You know, and especially if it's something that I really want to get feedback on, and I want the person to understand that, hey, this is, you know, you might think this is negative, but it's really not, or you might get defensive about it and so forth. So face to face is, you know, really the best. After that, I would say maybe a phone call, because you actually get to hear the person's voice and hear the tone and so forth. And then after that, then you come to some of those other things like email. But now we've got things like Skype as well. So, or, you know, I don't know, whatever the Mac stuff is, the Apple stuff, of course. So, but, you know, that kind of FaceTime and so forth. So you could do that. That could work out really well. So if you're not able to have the face-to-face in the classroom, having face-to-face maybe in the evening over Skype, that can definitely work. Online course discussions, so which we do here in this class, where we have our discussion boards and so forth. When we do have an online class, of course, you have to be motivated. You have to be motivated here because you have to keep up with everything, right? You got to put that time aside. You have to have some type of organization when you're going to do your assignments and so forth. It can be less threatening, though, so somebody might feel much more comfortable sharing something in an online format, like in a discussion board, or in a journaling activity with their professor, versus them actually sharing that in the classroom with everybody else around. And then you can share anytime, day or night. So, you know, you don't know exactly when I'm doing this video, day or night, and I'm going to be sharing it with you, and I don't know when you're going to be watching it. You could be watching it at 2 o'clock in the morning for all I know, right? All right, so we've got different types of feedback, and we've got, you know, I mean, there's, of course, other things like Twitter and, you know, Snapchat, all those other forms of communication, but for the most part, when we're talking about mentoring, we want to use one of these ways. Oh, it looks like my little thing didn't come out quite right here, so let's go through this. Oops, sorry, now I went way too fast. Okay. Conflict and problem solving. So, of course, we've got some, there's going to be conflict that happens at some point in time, okay? So nothing's never a perfect relationship. We talk about, you know, there's no perfect teacher or anything like that. Well, there's never a perfect relationship either. So conflict is bound to happen at some point in time as you're supervising other adults or mentoring someone in the field. Some tips, we've got some assertion skills, awareness of ourselves as mentors. So, you know, how are we in this process? Exactly, you know, what do we bring to the table? So first of all, I'm sorry, let me go back to the assertion skills. So with that, we want to make sure that, you know, sometimes things happen just because something's not really clear. You know, maybe I had a student today who emailed me about something, and it was for another class, and she was asking about the 4 assignments, and I'm like, the 4 assignments? What in the world is she talking about? Like, there's not 4 assignments for that. And I'm processing that in my head, going, what in the world? So actually, she emailed me a couple days ago, and then I emailed her back, and then she responded to me again, and she stated where it was at, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I went in and I found it. I was like, okay, yeah, I can see that that's there, and it was actually something that I should have changed when I had uploaded it to Canvas, and I didn't change that one little part, but nobody else had ever picked up on it. And part of those things I'd been using in Blackboard for a long time, So I was like, I don't know exactly how she, how she came about that. But it wasn't super clear. So of course I clarified it with her. I wanted to make sure that there was all resolved. There was nothing left unresolved in that process. So, and I feel good. And I also made a note to change it for next semester. So to make sure that that it never happens again. Awareness is ourselves as mentors. So, what are our values, our beliefs, our cultural assumptions? What are our biases about this whole mentoring process? Is this something we really want to do, or are we kind of being pushed into it? So, do I feel like I'm ready to be a mentor or not? Maybe, maybe not, and hopefully you are. We've also got that collaborative problem solving. So especially if you're getting resistance from a teacher, asking the question about maybe, hey, let's brainstorm some ideas on this. Let's just write down as many things as we can think about on this topic. And then, you've got ideas in there, they've got ideas in there, and then maybe you can try to figure out which ones are going to work best and which ones might not work best. And go through it that way. And then notice signs of burnout and seek referrals and help from others. So hopefully this is definitely not you, because you shouldn't be a mentor if you're feeling that burnout. The book gives you some great information there. I've also got there's some BAM radio programs that are part of this module and that you will be listening to. I want you to make sure that you listen to at least one of the programs. I'm going to put a couple up there. So, or should I say there are a couple up there. Yeah, so make sure that you listen to at least one of those. You're going to have to do that before you can move on through the module. Okay. But burnout, we've probably all seen teachers have burnout at some point in time in our careers. How are some teachers able to stay in the field working directly with young children for 25 plus years and others get out after a year or two? We've generally seen both sides of it. I know I have. I've seen many teachers who have lasted for over 25 years. And I've seen others who sometimes even just don't even actually get out there. Like they take all their classes, they finish up with their student teaching classes and so forth, and then they don't even make it into the field. And I'm like, okay, wow, that, not to say you're not going to get something out of it, maybe if you're going to be a parent or something like that down the road, but, burnout can definitely happen in this field. And the part of this is the disposition of the teacher definitely plays a role in longevity in the field. So exactly, are they able to hold high expectations for themselves? Again, not being perfect, but hold high expectations. Hey, you know what? When I leave my classroom, I'm going to make sure it's clean. Every day it's going to be clean. And then when you walk in the classroom, hey, it's clean. Whatever it might be, but you're going to hold yourself to some high expectation. I'm going to make sure that we have, cooking projects at least every 2 weeks in the classroom. Those types of things. Collaborate more with others, hey, and that's the one thing about this field is that, it's never, when there's a great activity idea, it's not plagiarizing. Okay, we share those ideas, we share those activities with anybody and everybody. I know whenever I go into a new classroom, I always like to bring a camera or have something like that because I want to learn. There's new things I could learn. So the more we collaborate with others, the more likelihood we're going to stay in the field for a longer period of time. Believe that you can make a difference. So I know we've talked about that before, that, sometimes you have this child and this family and you're working with them and then you don't necessarily know what happens after that. Sometimes it can go on to great experiences, and so you have to believe that you can make a difference. Suppressing emotions and not discussing changes and challenges lead to definitely more anxiousness and anxiety and burnout. So we want to talk about those things. If I hear a teacher saying, oh, I'm just getting so frustrated today. I worked in a program one time where we did have a teacher who she was a teacher who'd been with the agency for a very long time, and actually had retired and came back and was working more on a part-time basis, kind of like subbing and so forth. And she was at one of the meal tables with the children, and I wasn't there. I had heard about this. I wasn't right there in the classroom at that time. But she hit a child. So she smacked him across the face. And she knew what she did immediately. She went over to the director immediately and stated what she had done and knew that she could not be in the classroom anymore. At that point in time, the director, found somebody to go in for her. Her and the director had a long discussion in their office, and she knew that she was out of the field. She was a very nice woman. She was somebody who you'd never, expect this to happen from. The child was not, the child was not left with bruises or marks or anything like that. But of course, it had to get reported to licensing, and of course, it had to be talked to with the parent immediately. All those things, but she left that day, and she never came back into the field. She had total burnout, and it would have been nice for the director to have seen those signs prior to her actually hitting a child, of course, because we don't want we never wanted to get to that point. But for her on that day, it just happened, and I don't know necessarily if there were anything specific that that the director could have done differently, but it did happen. So we want to try to suppress that, or not suppress that, sorry. We want to make sure that we talk about teacher burnout and look for those signs, because we don't want somebody to be anxious and nervous and have anxiety about it. Teacher dispositions. This chart's, to me, is a little difficult to read. So I kind of actually like the next page. So when we talk about those, so if I go back, the dispositions, the kind of the going in and the going out type of thing, is what this chart is kind of showing. But I like this. So if we go from those personal dispositions, and there's some scenarios in your book that I'm not going to go over, but from the predictable, the reliable, the persistent, the responsible, to implementing research-based practices consistently. So, for instance, just because I did this art activity, for the last 15 years doesn't mean that I still have to do this art activity. I can do something new, different. I can research it out, figure out, process versus product. When we go from that caring, sensitive, responsive, and collaborative to operate from an ethic of care, so that you have a high standards of ethics in the sense that you want to make sure you're providing that best care possible. Going from the curious, noticing gaps in understanding and willing to examine contradiction and practices and ideas, to identifying questions to investigate and make corrections. So, that kind of goes back to that, the licensing one with the nap time, right? For identifying questions, investigate, make connections. Oh my gosh, what do we do? How can we do this? Is this really true? Asking those questions. And then takes risk with support and willing to hear other perspectives, to being creative, flexible, intentional. So that's one of the things I'm always like, take a risk, I'm not talking about somebody, jumping off the side of a building here. We're talking about, should I put out the paint today, Should paint with no brushes. Ooh, should we do finger painting? Might it be messy? Yeah, it might be messy, but let's take that risk, okay? And then hopefully somebody's able to be more creative and go, oh yeah, wow, that did work. So maybe I can try something again in the future. So teachers have varying dispositions, and hopefully we're all going from, a point of maybe not as, from maybe something that's not as well fine-tuned, professional, to something that is more professional. All right, last section here we're going to talk about is culturally responsive. Can you describe your own culture? So it's a good question to put out there. You might want to pause it here to think about that for a minute. I know I took a class during my bachelor's degree, and the whole class, we had to talk about our ethnicity, our background, our culture, where we came from, and so forth. Well, for the entire semester, it made you really think. It definitely did. Have you thought about how your culture could be a barrier to communicating effectively with others? definitely, because if we're communicating, I tend to be open and like, out there and, um, talking about things, but some people might not. So could that be something that, could there be something that could be a barrier there? For instance, here's one thing. So, in the classroom, we generally tend to use we should be using, if you're not, you should use the proper terminology for body parts. So we had this dad one time come into the classroom with one of the teachers, and this was in the toddler room, and this was years ago with a completely different staff and teachers and so forth. But the dad pointed to his hand, and he had a word written on his hand, and he said, "My child came home saying this," and it had the word penis. He wrote the word penis on his hand. He couldn't even say the word penis out loud to the teacher. Okay, so that's definitely something where he's coming from. Could it be part of his culture? It could be, because maybe that's the way in which he was raised. Where saying words that body part words were something that maybe he never said. Maybe he never said it to a person of the opposite sex. I don't know. But and the teacher was just kind of taken back. She's like, "Oh, penis?" She's like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, that's what it's called, right?" But the way in which she communicated with him might not have been as effective, because seeing that he couldn't even say that word out loud to her, there could be something else there that that maybe she could have handled it in a different way. Does that make sense? So hopefully that makes sense. Ooh, I'm checking for understanding, right? There's areas of cultural sensitivity that we have to be aware of, and some of it is personal space. I'm sure some of you have been around those people. Oh, I know, I was talking about this the other day. I was in line at the bank one day, and in between the little ropes that they give you at the bank, and there was a gentleman behind me, and he was a little bit older. I'd probably say, in his 70s, 80s, somewhere in there. And he just kept getting closer and closer to me. And I kind of kept scooting forward. Now, there's a woman in front of me, so I kind of wasn't wanting to get into her personal space, but I kind of moved forward a little bit. He was so close, like I could feel his breath down my neck. That's how close he was. So I was like, oh, this just feels really uncomfortable for me. So, so I kind of kept moving forward. I was like, okay, please, somebody, go, she needs to get called to the next window, that kind of thing. And every time I kind of move forward a little bit, just even a few inches, like he'd get closer and closer. And finally, I turned my body. So like my shoulder was facing him versus the back of me, where I was just kind of like, hey, you might be invading my space. He still really didn't get it. He just didn't understand that personal space. And for most of us, it's kind of like that, reach your hand out. So right now, put your hand out in front of you. That's kind of our personal space, okay? That's kind of our bubble around us for people that we don't know, okay? So if we don't know somebody, that's kind of our bubble for personal space. And if we get in that, that could be something that's really, that could be very uncomfortable, like it was uncomfortable for me. I know I had a parent one time, and like her personal space bubble was about 15 feet away. It was really, really tough to get to work, to try to work with her and her son and so forth, because her personal space bubble was so far away. Anytime I'd move any closer, she'd like step back. She'd be like out the door. And so I learned that about her. And over time, slowly but surely, I was able to, lessen that space to maybe about 5 or 6 feet. But at least I wasn't kind of shouting across the classroom at her. But yeah, personal space, that's something that we have to be aware of. Smiling. So, I smile, I hope, quite a bit. I tend to be a pretty happy person, and have a good outlook on things. But smiling can be a form of disrespect, and it can be a form of, thinking that somebody's understanding, but they're smiling and they're not really understanding. So being aware of how smiling can play a role with cultural sensitivity. Touching. So, for a child, or an adult, like in class and so forth. With my, with my students and everything, it's going to take a long time for me to even just kind of touch them on the shoulder, or, kind of give them a pat on the back, not specifically, but sometimes, somebody might be really upset and maybe they just kind of need that touch on the arm. But I'm really aware of that, and I don't necessarily feel maybe that comfortable with that myself. So, I grew up in a family that we didn't do a lot of hugging, hugging and kissing and so forth. But my in-laws definitely do. So, I've learned to get more comfortable with it over the course of time. But touching is one of those things that might be uncomfortable. So, even if you're a person that likes to, hug people and touch people, you might want to be aware of that, that not everybody feels comfortable with that. Eye contact, again, can be shown as a form of disrespect. So be aware that just because somebody's not making eye contact with you doesn't necessarily mean that they're ignoring you. But having that awareness and seeing if that is an issue or a sensitivity. Silence, too. So, sometimes it takes people a little bit longer to process something. So, that's why I kind of say, are you guys understanding this? Do you get this? Are you, trying to look for that confirmation, where they might just be silent because it's part of their culture, where I'm trying to see, okay, are you silent because you don't understand, or do you understand? And then finally, time concepts. So you have to be aware that, not all cultures are exactly on time. And be aware that, and that's a hard thing to balance sometimes, especially if you're working with a teacher that might always be late or might not hold appointments and so forth. So is it a cultural sensitivity issue, or is it something that's just more of a personal thing, or maybe they can't get to the appointment, they can't get to come to see you because, maybe they, maybe they're trying to close down their classroom or whatever it might be. So being aware of that. All right. In summary, we want to make sure that over the course of this lecture, we've talked about our communication skills are put to the test when we supervise or mentor a teacher. Listening and using open-ended questions are extremely important. We've got that cycle of communication, that reflecting, applying, and observing. We've got teacher dispositions and burnout, so make sure you listen to at least one of those BAM radio programs. And then we've got the cultural responsiveness and sensitivity. So be sure if you have any questions about this chapter, make sure you ask on the general discussion board. And this way everybody can benefit from your responses and your questions, my response, and your classmates' response. All right, thank you so much. Have a good day.